the people are doing. So here's the thing about this comparison. Now I've actually been putting this one off for a little bit, but well, we're finally here, and that's a really good thing because the fact is simple. In this video comparison, one thing that I've basically summarized at this point is that the Vivo X200 Pro, as per the previous comparison I made with the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it really showcased just how bad stabilization is. It's got good dynamic range, it's got a lot of other good stuff going for it, it's got really nice log video as well, but stabilization is bad. It's really bad. At least it was bad. I'm not really sure how it turned out this time around. We'll see. Of course, we did have, I think, one software update in between, and I'm hoping that it might have improved something. I'm not sure. I haven't really reviewed the footage yet, but we will review it and we'll see exactly how it stacks up. Now, the reason this is so interesting, this particular comparison, is because the Find X8 Pro, it has a massive focus on stabilization. Like it basically provides us with 4K 30 and I believe also 4K 60 ultra stable mode, which is kind of insane to think about. Like no other smartphone goes for anything beyond 2.5 or 2.8K. Even the X200 Pro doesn't go beyond 2.8K. Even the iPhone doesn't go beyond 2.8K. That's quite something. So the only thing that I really want to find out is, does it actually make a difference on the Find X8 Pro? That's all there is. Does having that kind of ultra stabilization, is it just there for the sake of it, or does it actually improve the footage? Does it actually improve the stabilization? I think it actually gives us a bit of a crop, so my hopes are high, but we'll see. Alright, then starting with the selfie video. So here's the thing. I like how the X200 Pro looks. Honestly, its video quality, this is a sheer quality, the dynamic range, the way the exposure is handled, the way you get a lot of good contrast without crushing too much shadows, so on and so forth. All that stuff, it's being nailed so well that really nothing to complain about. But the problem is that not only do we get more of a crop as opposed to the Find X8 Pro, there is also the problem with the stabilization not being nearly as good as the Find X8 Pro. So even more of a crop and less stabilization kind of makes it quite a problem in that regard. Look, to be entirely honest, not exactly a deal breaker, mainly because if you're not moving around too much, then the X200 Pro is technically better as opposed to the Find X8 Pro, but stabilization is a key issue over here. But then the audio quality, see here we actually have a small difference. It's mainly in the fact that the Find X8 Pro muffles my voice a bit more as opposed to the X200 Pro. Everything else is very similar, but it's just the muffling that I'm not the biggest fan of. The X200 Pro just has a little bit more depth, which I prefer, and I think most people will. But then of course the meat of the matter, because this is 4K 30 with the rear cameras, and well, it's actually looking not too shabby on both. I do think that the X200 has maybe a pinch higher dynamic range, but it's a very minor difference. And the Find X8 Pro also seems to have a good bit of sharpening. Now I'm not sure how much you can see on YouTube, but there's definitely a bit of sharpening happening. Perhaps if you look at the texture of the bricks, that might be a place where you can kind of see the difference in sharpness. But what I think is quite possibly going to be one of the most interesting things about the Find X8 Pro is that we get ultra steady video with 4K 30 and with 4K 60 as well. We'll get to 4K 60. And so in theory, it sounds like a fantastic feature. But to be honest, I'm not seeing a huge difference. Perhaps maybe a tiny pinch less jerking on the Find X8 Pro as opposed to the Vivo, which, to be entirely honest, the Vivo doesn't have the best stabilization. Like there are phones out there that have much better stabilization, and the fact that the Find X is only able to give you just slightly better stabilization, well, that doesn't exactly bode well now, does it? Because it is using ultra stable. Obviously, I am challenging the stabilization, not exactly being gentle about it, but still concerning. And then of course we have the ultra wide camera. Now this time, once again, we are not using ultra stable. We'll get to that in a moment, but one thing that I just have to point out, look at the sunset. Just look at how absolutely stunning that gradient looks on the X200 Pro. Honestly, the video quality and the way everything is handled, the way everything is so beautifully balanced on the X200 Pro, it just makes me that much more disappointed when it comes to the stabilization, because as you can probably tell, neither of these two have very good stabilization. But supposedly the Find X8 Pro has a fix for that. You can use ultra stable, which will give you a bit of a crop, but the problem is, once again, this difference is really not there. Again, I'm letting the smartphones take over most of the stabilization workload, not exactly stabilizing my own hands even. And as you can probably tell, there are a lot of jerks on both, almost equally as bad on both, which is where the concern comes in. Because yes, the X200 Pro, we already knew that it didn't have the best stabilization. There are many other smartphones that can actually do better. I know for a fact that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra can do better with stabilization as opposed to the X200 Pro. But the Find X8 Pro, which supposedly specializes with stabilization, I'm not seeing the benefit here. Like, yes, it's nice that it has ultra stable across the board on all cameras with all resolutions, but what's the point if it doesn't give you the proper benefits? Now, when it comes to versatility, I'd say this is where the Find X8 Pro is going to take a lead, mainly because the Vivo X200 Pro simply has an ultra-wide camera, a main camera, and a 3.7x telephoto. Now, the 3.7x telephoto is very good, no doubt about that. But of course, when it comes to video, I would say that having optical zoom is always going to be beneficial. And that is exactly where the Find X8 Pro comes in, because Oppo has gone for not one but two telephoto cameras, which is of course a 3x and our good old-fashioned 6x. That's a very nice combination to have. And even though in photography, in my experience at least, the Find X8 Pro's 3x and 6x combination, they haven't been the best out there in terms of overall quality, in videos it's very beneficial because you get optical zoom quality on two different telephoto levels. Is a 6x going to be particularly worthwhile except for bird watching? Maybe not, but it's always good to have more versatility. However, speaking of versatility, in my opinion, even though the Oppo has more optical zoom, the X200 is far more flexible because it allows you to go for log video. And that honestly is always going to be a stunning feature to have, regardless of what anyone says, because having log video is such a blessing. Like, for someone who is into content creation like me, and for someone who really likes to color grade videos like me, this is the perfect thing to have. I mean, you can see for yourself, once color graded, it looks stunning. I can tell you right now, if I tried to do this with regular video, there'd be some artifacting, there'd be some noise, there'd be some problems, to say the very least, which is precisely why having log video is such a big deal for me. Of course, if you're not interested in that, if you just want regular good quality video, then I'd say either way is fine. But yeah, log video for me, that's not having log video is a deal breaker at this point because so many phones are starting to have it. Even the S25 Ultra supposedly has log video, and well, those videos are coming soon enough. But before that, we've got 4K 60, and see, this is where things are going to be much more interesting. Mainly because initially when I tested out 4K 60, it appeared as though Vivo had completely forgotten to add any kind of stabilization to it. It seems it's gotten a little bit better, but it is still not good, not nearly as good as it should be. It's quite problematic. Now on the Find X8 Pro, I do have ultra steady video running, which means you do get a bit of a crop, but the stabilization, at least compared to the Vivo X200 Pro, it is better. But I'm still seeing some jerks here and there, which should not be there, especially when you're considering the fact that it's ultra stable. Where's the ultra stable at? Like, this is regular 4K 60 that I can get from just about any other smartphone that isn't the X200 Pro. Because the X200 stabilization sucks balls. That's the problem. You see a similar problem on the ultra-wide camera. If anything, the ultra-wide camera looks decidedly worse as opposed to the main camera on the Find X8 Pro, even with ultra-stable video right there. Honestly, I don't know what to think. At least with the 4K 60, there's a lot of problems with stabilization on both phones, through and through. Neither of them are particularly usable. And there's definitely smartphones out there that can do 4K 60 significantly better than both of these two combined. Now, another nail in the coffin of the Find X8 Pro is that it doesn't have 8K video. Now, I'm not saying the X200 Pro's 8K video is perfect. It's not really the best out there, once again, owing to the fact that its stabilization is not the best. Is it usable? Yes, very much so. It's actually got better stabilization than its very own 4K 60, which is why I hypothesize that Vivo just forgot to add stabilization or proper stabilization to 4K 60, because if 8K can have better stabilization, then there's a real problem going on right there. But for the sake of the comparison, it doesn't even matter because the Oppo doesn't even have 8K. OnePlus 13 has 8K. I thought both of these phones had very similar camera softwares. It's identical. So why do we not get 8K on the Oppo? Honestly, I'm not sure, but if you know the answer, let me know in the comments. But then, super stable video on both. What I can tell you is this: the Oppo will obviously pull ahead because it has better quality video. But the stabilization, the Oppo is such a paradox. I say that because the Vivo, on one hand, yes, it kind of masters the quality and masters a lot of other areas. It gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of log video and so on and so forth. It has 8K, for the love of God, it has 8K. But it kind of sucks at stabilization. That's like the one major issue. The Oppo, on the other hand, it kind of showcases stabilization as its selling point, but then it doesn't deliver in the slightest, which is why a paradox. But anyways, we are heading back indoors, and now we're taking a look at, of course, details. This is of course 4K 30 on both, and well, when we crop all the way in, I think it's very close on both. Maybe the X200 Pro has a touch more sharpening going on. What bothers me is that when I took the video outdoors with 4K 30, it looked like the Find X had more sharpening, but in this case, at least when it's static, it appears the Find X's sharpening is not that bad. So, not really sure what happened there, but well. When it comes to 8K, of course, now this is where, as you would expect, the X200 Pro will pull ahead, obviously, because 8K, it just has a lot more resolution, and the quality of 8K on the X200 Pro is not too shabby. Obviously, the Find X8 Pro has nothing as such to offer in that regard, which is honestly sad and kind of confusing as well, because why do we not get 8K once again? Anywho, next up we have the ultra-wide camera, and this is just 4K on both, and you can't really go to 8K on the X200 Pro either. So cropping all the way in, I would say that the X200 Pro has less sharpening, while the Find X8 Pro has more sharpening but also has more detail coming out. So it really does depend a little bit on preference, I guess, because you could go either way, to be honest. And of course, with the ultra-wide video, maybe a little bit of sharpening can help out, because more often than not, you're not going to crop into the ultra-wide to check out details, but having a bit of sharpening can maybe bring out the details, maybe a boost in clarity can help, that sort of thing. But then of course we have low light video. Now, in this case, there's actually a lot of lights going on, as you can probably tell, but it's just not that bad on either. Both of them look about as good as you would expect. The X200 Pro actually looks really nice when it comes to nighttime video in general. Even when it's much lower light than this, it actually turns out really well. The Find X8 Pro doesn't really surprise me either. It looks nice. That's the best way to put it. But well, looking at it now, I kind of feel like it would have been better if I had much lower light video available, but yeah, I can't really do much about that now, can I? And then finally, slow motion on both. So it's very simple which one I'm gonna prefer, because the X200 Pro, once again, the balance on the X200 Pro is quite something. Yes, stabilization sucks in a lot of areas, but compared to the Oppo Find X8 Pro, the way it can handle contrast just looks so much nicer. I'd say the quality is very similar, but simply because of just how nicely it is able to handle exposure and contrast, it just works perfectly. And yes, I did use tap to focus on both, and no, nothing really changed on the Oppo Find X8 Pro. This is exactly how it looked when I pointed the camera at it. If there were changes, I would let you know. But obviously, the main reason why I think slow motion is a slam dunk win on the X200 Pro is simply because Vivo provides us with 4K 120, which is by far the best, objectively the best slow motion mode that you can have. And there's really nothing else quite like it. And yes, sure, both phones also have super slow-mo modes, but let's face it, those things are the definitions of a gimmick. No two ways about that. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this comparison, I must say. Unexpected to say the least. I think the best way to put it is that when I first checked out all the camera modes on the Oppo, I was disappointed when I realized it doesn't have 8K. But then, I was kind of impressed. At least I was hoping to be impressed when I saw that it had ultra stable video across all cameras, across all camera modes, including 4K 60. I was like, well, perhaps the thinking is that maybe by the time you're done admiring the stabilization, and the stabilization is so bloody blockbuster on this, that you won't even care that we don't have 8K. That is not the case, to say the least. It's not even close to the case. Like, the best that the Find X can do is maybe perform marginally better with stabilization in certain instances, whilst everything else is not nearly as good. Like, the dynamic range is not as good, the contrast, the exposure balance is not as good. It doesn't give you 8K, it doesn't give you log video, which are staples at this point, as you can probably tell. So even though the X200 Pro has its problems with stabilization overall, I still think it just performs better. And the Find X, as far as I know, doesn't even have 4K 120 unless it's hidden somewhere. But the point is this, at the end of the day, the X200 Pro just has more to offer. Even with not very good stabilization, it still has a lot more to offer. So my preference, without a doubt, especially because of vlog video, goes to the X200 Pro for videography in general. It's kind of sad, the state of the Find X8. Really disappointed in the way things worked out, or didn't work out, I could say. Anyways, I'll see you guys soon with many more to come, especially perhaps the S25 Ultra's camera comparisons. Cheers.